As of 2020, over 535,000 Kenyans were living abroad. In the 10 months to October 2021, Kenyans living outside of the country sent home an average of 34.3 billion Kenyan shillings. That's about $304.7 million per month. This was a 20.4% increase compared to the 28.5 billion Kenyan shillings remitted in the same period in 2020. But what is the cost of sending this money home? The Central Bank of Kenya, CBK, said that the cost of remittances into Kenya is averaging about 7%, which is slightly below the average of 8% for sub-Saharan Africa, but well above the ideal target of 3%. There are several reasons why remittances are important to developing economies such as Kenya, but with the rising costs, there is the potential that it could reduce in the coming year. Why has it become so expensive for Kenyans to send money home? What could be done to bring down the cost? Today, we're focusing on the rising cost of remittance to Kenya. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ali Khan Sachu. He's an Africa geoeconomic and macro analyst, as well as the CEO of Rich Management and a friend of the show. Ali Khan, welcome back to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate it.
All right. I think you'll need to speak up just a bit so we can be sure we hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. All right. So let's first, for the purposes of this conversation, establish why remittances, which is basically a citizen of a country living outside of that country and sending money home. Why is it important for countries like Kenya? For the last year, Kenya was third on the list, receiving the third highest level of remittance in this past 1 year. So it's a very important part of the economy. Why is that?
Absolutely. It's critical for most of sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, remittances have overtaken FDI since 2018 for sub-Saharan Africa, vastly outperforming expectations. I mean, last year, most of the big multilateral institutions expected a sharp slowdown in remittances, but in fact, Kenya had a double-digit year-on-year gain. It underpins the currency. It's a source of support for families. It's extremely important, and basically, it's now more important than foreign aid. It's more important than foreign direct investment. It is the single most important income for most African countries today.
So while you list the good things that remittances can do, there's the other side of the argument that does say that remittances can actually have a negative impact on growth in recipient countries. So this argument is based on the fact that there are those who believe that it can reduce incentives to work and thereby reduce labor supply or labor force participation. What do you think about that side of the argument?
I entirely disagree with that side of the argument. I mean, it's been found that remittances are a social safety net for many families back home, and it's pretty critical. I don't think our people are sitting at home living high on inward remittances coming from their relatives abroad. I just don't see that. Maybe there are some cases, and there have been many cases of family fraud where people have said, oh yes, we're building a house, and shown people photographs, and then when those folks turn up, there's nothing there. So definitely not. I don't think it's leading to lazy behavior at home. I think it's very critical, and I think it proves the intellectual capital of our citizens. This is the monetization of talent in foreign countries, and it's in a significant uptrend, and really you could even describe it as a silver bullet.
All right, so from your stance, I believe that you believe that remittances into Kenya have been more useful than harmful. So give us some of the situations you've seen in which Kenyans have put remittances from other Kenyans living abroad into use. What's been the most usefulness you've seen for remittances into Kenya?
So a lot of people, from the analysis I've seen, a lot of the research shows that about 60 to 65% is going into emergency support. So things like school fees, hospital bills, other emergency-related expenditure. And then, you've got the balance which is being invested in back home, either building a house for people whilst they live abroad, or other investments. So I think it's finding a very productive use. Increasingly, we've seen different institutions and banks looking to bring institutional investments to the diaspora. But essentially, I think the diaspora is key, not only in Kenya, in Nigeria as well, many other countries on the continent. And it's really important, I think, that we embed the diaspora into our economies and also into the political discussion as well, and give them a voice. We just shouldn't be just taking their money.
We shouldn't just be taking their money. So let's talk about the money they're sending. As you said, a lot of the analysis was expecting that there would be a sharp decline in remittances into sub-Saharan Africa. So that did happen with Nigeria, but overall there was an increase if you take Nigeria out of the equation. With the COVID-19 pandemic, Kenyans living abroad sent home 34.3 billion, an increase of 20.4%, but it has also cost them a bit more to send this money home. They had to spend 2.4 billion Kenyan shillings per month to be able to send this money home to relatives and friends and help out, as you said. What is driving the expenses? What is driving the cost or the rising cost behind Kenyans being able to send money home?
So, I mean, this is a historical problem that costs of remittances into Africa from Europe, North America, and the Middle East has historically been very expensive. It's a highly profitable business. Initially, you had very few suppliers of this remittance channel, and they were able to price gouge, I'm afraid, for a very, very long time. So the trend now is, in fact, for lower charges, but it's still the optics of the 7% handle is incredible, and that's why you've had a lot of competition come into this space. You've seen different entrants come in. Historically, this was a game for the likes of Western Union, then the banks stepped in, and now you've got just pure play remittance businesses, particularly in the fintech space, who are looking to reduce costs in this area. It's a highly profitable, juicy business. And it's about time some of the fat was taken off the bone. So numbers too high, the costs are too high, they are trending lower. It's a more competitive space. Over time, I think you're going to see half the rate we're currently seeing.
Okay, and it's interesting you talk about the historic trend because it was actually in the double digits in the early, in about mid-2011 thereabouts, and it has come down significantly over the time. Now, the Central Bank of Kenya said the cost of remittances is an average of 7%, which we've talked about, just a bit lower than the sub-Saharan average, and of course, above the targets of 3%. What is being done officially? So you can talk about the fintechs coming into the space. Those are sort of the players outside. But in terms of regulation and the authority that the Central Bank of Kenya has, what are they doing and able to sort of bridge that gap between what is actually obtainable and the ideal target band of 3%?
So for the time being, I would say about 75% of these remittances are channeled through the banks. And the apex regulator, the Central Bank of Kenya, obviously regulates the banks. So I think, they can chivvy the banks along. They can put pressure on the banks to bring these rates down. But the nature of free markets is that competition will bring these prices down. Until we see more competitors in this space, these fees will stay sticky. So we're now seeing M-Pesa, we're seeing the banks, we're seeing the fintechs, and I think given the enormous spreads that they're earning, you're going to see fee compression over time. But I don't think that the bank can just legislate and say from tomorrow it's 3%. It just won't work because it's such an important lifeline, and it could cause a problem if you go down that particular route.
All right, Ali Khan, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, as we said, Kenyans actually sent more than was expected. We'll look into why there's an increase in that. And again, looking to the sub-Saharan conversation, it's actually more expensive to send money around the continent than to send money to the continent. So those will be pieces of the conversation we pick up right after this. We're looking at the rising cost of remittance to Kenya, but we will be expanding the conversation. And why is it that Kenyans actually spent, or rather sent more money home in the past 10 months than was expected, and how, given the fact that the world is still battling COVID-19? The conversation continues after this. Africa geoeconomic and macro analyst Ali Khan Sachu is my guest today as we look at the rising cost of remittances to Kenya. Now, in a year where the world is still actively battling the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the 10 months dating to October 2021, Kenyans living abroad sent home an average of 34.3 billion Kenyan shillings per month. And that, as we said, was a 20.4% increase from the year before, where we had job layoffs and we had people having to stay at home because of restrictions. How did Kenyans manage this? So, Ali Khan, let me bring you back into the conversation. What do you think is responsible for the increase we saw in remittances in a year where there were layoffs globally, harsher economic times and climes, but Kenyans sent home more money?
So it's very interesting, actually, at this point. Just to give you a sense, about half inward remittances come from North America. About 30% comes from Europe, and about 20% comes from the Middle East and Asia. When I looked into and analyzed, who are these folks, I looked into it particularly in North America, and it's very interesting. It's a very highly educated. Education is very valued in Kenya, and obviously folks who've had a good education and have ventured abroad in order to earn a living. So the average Kenyan, for example, in North America is highly educated and holding a high value job. They're not doing, bottom of the pyramid type work. They are reasonably educated and holding down quite high paid jobs. In terms of the Middle East, there's a very big service economy, obviously in the Middle East, and hotels and so forth. Kenya's had a long-term tourism industry. A lot of people were poached by Dubai, by the airlines and so forth. And really what I'm seeing from there is these guys held on to their jobs through the recession and came out reasonably well on the other side. So it's quite interesting from the perspective, the Kenyan diaspora, very well educated, sophisticated, able to hold on to what were their jobs in a very tough environment. So then you also had the effect of these stimulus checks, which were distributed around. That also supported people working abroad. So overall, a very positive picture. And that's why you got such an above the trend gain in what was considered a very, very difficult year.
So let's look at the flip side of this. So the remittances coming into Kenya are said to be around 3% of the GDP of the country. Many would have expected that it would be COVID that would sort of have maybe pushed this to a 2% or 1.5% for this year. But if there was to be an extraordinary situation in which remittances from Kenyans abroad into Kenya maybe hit the double digits, maybe around the 10 billion or around maybe, let's say, even in the single digit numbers, what do you think the knockdown effect would be on the economy if remittances ever went so drastically low?
It would be a major problem. For example, for the currency, the currency has been weakening this year. We've hit a record low, and that's notwithstanding the amount of inflows we're seeing from those remittance numbers. So I think you would hit a big problem with the currency. I think the remittances underpinned the economy last year. GDP would have contracted much more than minus 0.6. And I think, this effect of distribution, this is remittances, I think, are the most effective distribution across the country. You would see increased poverty in many areas, because I think a lot of people who are relying on these remittances for subsistence. So look, it's more important than our foreign direct investment. It's more important than any foreign aid. It is the single most important pillar currently of the economy and the biggest source of foreign exchange. And that's extraordinary when you think we're a tourism economy. So very, very critical. A sharp slide would send the shilling, I think, 5 to 10% lower.
Wow. All right, so let's get into widening the context of this. It costs more to send money to Kenya from other African countries, including, for example, Tanzania, South Africa, and Rwanda, which also have very large Kenyan communities, than it costs to send money from Germany, Canada, and the United States. Why does it cost so much more to send money inter-Africa around the continent than it does to send from outside the continent?
So this is not purely a problem for Kenya. This is a problem for any African country south of the Sahara. And interestingly, if you look at, people talk about immigration, most of our people are actually immigrating within the continent. So this is a problem that more people are facing because of the patterns of immigration around the continent. Look, they're being ripped off. That's the bottom line, I'm afraid. And
Wow.
For too long, we've had people who've been sitting in very cozy positions, able to take very large fees off people because there were no other options. But increasingly, with the arrival some years ago of mobile money, the fact that the likes of Vodacom are in multiple countries on the continent, this is a mega opportunity for the telecoms to go for gold, because there are large volumes. The telecoms in most countries already have the mobile money in place, and I think they're not being aggressive enough in chasing this business.
All right, so finally, Ali Khan, and we'll end with this larger context. So sub-Saharan Africa's average cost is around 8%, as we said, and that's nearly double the cost for South Asia, which is 4.6%. Kenya's target is 3%. And we're seeing a situation, you mentioned the telecoms, mobile money. We're seeing how digitization as well as fintech is changing this space. But what else do you think needs to be done to make the remittance system more efficient and less expensive, particularly on the continent?
So I think, the regulators have got to look at this more carefully. They've got to encourage companies which are focused on remittances intra-Africa and then global remittance businesses. They should be supporting these. There's a good startup culture there as well. A lot of Africans have been doing this via cryptocurrencies. It's pushed Africans into cryptocurrency because it's been cheaper and more efficient way of doing your own, interfamily remittances. But I think it needs a concerted effort by everybody, including the likes of the African Development Bank and other big multilateral institutions from the continent, in order to deal with this, because this is a very, very high toll charge on our people's hard work, and I don't think they deserve to be charged these kinds of fees. It's just not fair, and we need to move quickly to the Asian pricing system, because the importance is only going to grow of this. Yeah, as I said, 2018 remittances have outpaced every single other income stream for countries on the continent, and I only see that trend continuing and accelerating. And we can't afford to be giving up 7% for nothing on that kind of cash, because it gets put to use in our countries, whether it's at a subsistence level, whether an investment level. But this is cash coming in, which is key to the development of our economies.
All right, Ali Khan Sachu, thank you so much. We'll touch base with you again sometime soon. Do have a pleasant day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. And one thing that I'm continuing to take away for remittances to sub-Saharan Africa, they've become much more important than foreign direct investment as well as foreign aid. Now, due to the huge sums involved, diaspora remittances are now being recognized as an important contributor to a country's growth and development. Remittances represent the human face of globalization, and Africa and the international community must work together to make remittances more affordable and impactful for the millions of families and countless communities who depend on them. You're watching Business Edge. We wrap up with NC4 to watch. And we start things off in Kenya, where, of course, we're hearing that the central bank is now considering joining the central bank digital currency CBDC train. More than 60 central banks have already entered the digital currency race since 2014. The shift towards digital currencies has been used by some central banks to formulate and implement regulations to manage the use of cryptocurrencies. Diaspora remittances into Nigeria increased by 15.6% quarter on quarter to $9.22 billion in the first half of 2021, compared to $9.02 billion recorded in the same period of 2020. The Central Bank of Nigeria says the increase follows the continuation of the Naira for Dollar initiative. This rewards recipients with 5 Naira for every $1 they receive from licensed international money transfer operators and commercial banks. The International Monetary Fund says Senegal's economy will grow by 5% in 2021, revising a forecast of 3.5% made for this year. The fund said it had reached a staff-level agreement with the West African nation that could pave the way for the disbursement of around $180 million under an existing loan deal. And finally, Namibia's President Hage Geingob has reappointed the country's central bank governor. Now, the former Old Mutual executive has been governor since June 2020, when he completed the remainder of the term of his predecessor, who was appointed finance minister in March of 2020. And that's the show for today, wrapping up a week where we've put business, financial, and economic stories from the continent front and center right here on Business Edge. 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. Join us for the conversations that arrive around what Africa is doing. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Have a pleasant weekend.